They have not really gotten a deal on Ukraine, and certainly with the Trump administration being distracted now by the war with Iran in the Persian Gulf, there's less attention by the US on Ukraine, so there's no real process at the moment. The Trump administration has also proved willing to introduce sanctions against Russia, for instance, against Russian oil majors Rosneft and Lukoil last fall.
Russia has been accused of violating Polish airspace after a missile exploded in the country earlier this week. Despite the missile being considered a stray, NATO members have launched a series of jets and announced that all necessary measures will be taken to defeat its territory. My next guest is Hanna Notte, who is director of the Eurasia programme at the James Martin Centre, and she's the author of We Shall Outlast Them, Putin's global campaign to defeat the West. And in her latest book, Hanna argues that Putin's invasion in Ukraine is part of a much broader plan to reshape the global order. Hanna, welcome to the show. What do you mean by a broader plan to reshape the global order? What do you think Putin is wanting to do?
Thanks for having me, Ayesha. So I think when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, this was not just about dictating the fate of Ukraine or taking Ukrainian territory. It was really a larger game at play here, where Putin basically wants to have a say over the European security architecture. He wants to have a say over the rules of global order. From his point of view, it's the United States that has for too long dictated the rules of the game in international politics. He looks at Russia as a great power that is entitled to its own sphere of influence in its neighborhood. And so I think when he invaded Ukraine, he thought that he could create a fait accompli quickly, that he could subjugate Ukraine quickly, that there wasn't going to be a need for a long war, so that he could basically produce a situation which the West would have to accept. Now, of course, 4.5 years into this war, we understand that this is not how things turned out. This turned into a long war. It led to a total rupture of ties between Russia and the United States and Europe. Russia is now the most sanctioned country in the world. And so Russia has had to totally adapt its foreign policy to deal with this new situation. And that is essentially the subject of my book, where I tell how Russia has hustled to secure support for itself, especially in the non-Western world. And
do you think that Donald Trump is being helpful to Putin's agenda? Do you think that Putin is sort of persuading, not overtly, but maybe subliminally, Donald Trump, in terms of sort of being quite helpful to him?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Ayesha. I would say that now, almost 1.5 years into this second Trump administration, the balance sheet from Russia's point of view is rather mixed. I think there was a lot of anticipation in Moscow in early 2025, when Donald Trump re-entered the White House, that Russia could make some sort of deal with the United States over the heads of the Ukrainians. We all remember President Trump's rhetoric on Ukraine and on the war. Early into his second term, it was clear that he had no interest in dealing with this war. He said he could settle it in less than 24 hours. He threatened to cut support to the Ukrainians. So I think there was a lot of anticipation in Moscow. There were meetings between Americans and Russians in Saudi Arabia. So there was the prospect of a normalization in the US-Russia relationship. There was, of course, the red carpet that was rolled out for Vladimir Putin in Anchorage in Alaska at the summit last summer. But then if we look at what has actually materialized beyond rhetoric for the Russians from this Trump administration, I think, that the Russians are not very satisfied. They have not really gotten a deal on Ukraine, and certainly with the Trump administration being distracted now by the war with Iran in the Persian Gulf, there's less attention by the US on Ukraine, so there's no real process at the moment. The Trump administration has also proved willing to introduce sanctions against Russia, for instance, against Russian oil majors Rosneft and Lukoil last fall. And while the US has been so erratic, the Europeans have also stepped up their own support for Ukraine, which has become a lot more meaningful. So Russia is not in a situation right now where they can win this war, despite this at times effusive rhetoric that we have heard from the Trump administration.
Okay, Hanna. Well, look, thank you very much for your time. And Hanna's book is out now, We Shall Outlast Them.